Unmute, unmute yourself, Pat.
Welcome, everyone, to the Channel Islands chapter of the California Native Plant Society. Our mission is to conserve and to promote native plant diversity throughout Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. And on behalf of the Board of Directors, before we begin the program tonight, we want to acknowledge the Chumash people, past, present, and future, as the traditional custodians of this land, who live in relationship to the land as a living and integrated system of which we and all plants and animals are a part. We want to pay our respects to the Chumash elders of the past, present, and future who call this place their home. As we come together today, we bring awareness to the issues of equity and justice, and we recognize the Chumash people and so many other indigenous people who are still working to preserve and enhance the lands and culture of their tribal territories. Please join us in a moment of reflection to honor the Chumash wisdom. Our speaker tonight is Sophie McLean. She'll be speaking on building community through plants, the importance of a sense of place, in which she will lead us to explore the science behind growing local native plants and how this weaves together landscape-wide restoration as well as the communities of flora, fauna, and human alike. Sophie McLean is a local botanist and land manager who works for the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, where she runs an amazing native plant nursery. She is passionate about prescribed fire as a tool for habitat restoration, and she has promised us another talk on just this topic in January of 2008. She has a degree in plant biology from Montana State University and grew up in Ventura County. Any time spent not looking at plants, she is reading and or sailing. Take it away, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Pat. I deeply appreciate it. And that was a beautiful land acknowledgement. I will share my screen and we can get into it. Okay. As you can see in here, like CMPS is pinned on the Chrome, so we are very much CMPS lovers. Okay, let me start my slideshow. All right, can thumbs up? You can see me? Okay, beautiful. I'm Sophie. My presentation will be on building community through plants, the importance of a sense of place. Sorry, I was starting a little timer. I wanted to speak on plants more than just the science of them and the work I do in this presentation. I wanted to speak on them as a vessel of culture. And that's because a lot of my work is science communication, and it's bringing together plants and people. And so this presentation is how I do that. I know I'm speaking to the choir. You guys are all here at a California Native Plant Society event. You're wanting to learn about plants. And there's so many wonderful things to learn, but I think this one will focus on where plants and people meet together. I believe plants are a vessel of connection, and so we shall get into it. About me, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Pat. I did study plant biology at Montana State University, but a lot of my work in the past is an amalgamation of lots of plant work. I worked at a plant pathology lab studying pathogens and pests on pulse crops and wheat crops. I worked as a baling hay on a wheat farm. I worked on a biodynamic farm. I worked as a landscaper on ranches and a landscaper in like homes in Big Sky, Montana. So I have a diverse array of plant experience, which I'm really grateful for, that set me up to what I do to this day. And I'm the native plant specialist and nursery manager at Ojai Valley Land Conservancy. Most of my work is managing some restoration projects. So I project manage agricultural conversions from orchards to oak trees. I do a lot of our community engagement with plants, and I grow all of the 75 species we grow in our nursery, all native plants and collected in Ojai. And I'm also a board member of the Ojai Valley Green Coalition, which is a really interesting organization because it coalesces a lot of the organizations in our areas and distributes that community and information and hosts events for this information to go back into the community. So we do book clubs and events, and I really enjoy that part of environmental work as well. So, we already did our land acknowledgement, but I'm talking about people and plants, and I can't talk about people and plants without acknowledging the Chumash peoples. This land has been, was, and will be stewarded by Chumash peoples. And I want to add a caveat that this is unceded land we're on. Okay, let's get into it. Why local native plants? The three reasons I'm going to talk about today, but we're really going to dive into the third one, is one, local native plants are a local solution to a global problem. So it's simple, it's doable by everyone, but it helps solve a lot of global issues today. Two, I love conserving the California floristic province. And then three, creating a sense of place. Local solutions, habitat restoration. There's so many benefits for habitat restoration, and I know I'm speaking to the choir here. Overall Restoration, which is the balance between installing native plants and removing invasive plants, it sequesters carbon, we increase biodiversity, we infiltrate water, it shifts fire behavior. It creates habitat connectivity, and it creates wildlife corridors. All of these stitch together and can create an amazing solution to these issues that are really big for a lot of people. Like, it's so big that sometimes we feel like we can't solve it all. And what I love about habitat restoration is it creates resiliency within our communities. It creates micro habitats that can really bolster our community, both plants, animals, humans, everyone. Moreover, why local native plants? Emphasis on the local is the California floristic province is an incredible province that spans from the top of California down into Baja. It's an area of incredible plant biodiversity, some of the highest in the world, and this is because of our climate and our topography. A huge reason why we have the California floristic province and why it evolved in this way is because there was a really quick shifting of climate and the uplifting of mountains. And the California plant species had to adapt to that really quickly. And the reason why they are able to groove into the nooks of canyons, the tops of mountains, into valley floors, coasts, and deserts was because of their ability to hybridize. Species like Salvia, Ceanothus, and annual forbs hybridize really readily. And then they evolved into all of these different niches that we have today. I think a good example is if you walk the Ventura River Preserve, you can see multiple species of salvias. You can see hummingbird sage, you can see white sage, purple sage, black sage, chia sage, or Ceanothus too. There's multiple species that you can walk through. Hairy Ceanothus, big pod, green bark. And the annual forbs, you just walk through after fire, after flood, or any kind of spring, you'll see different annuals that pop up every year that are an expression of what is happening that year. And so there's so much diversity. And I love that. I'm in love with it, absolutely. And a question I want to pose, if our species can hybridize so readily, how do human actions impact the local genetics? And this is why I emphasize local native plants. Watershed-specific plants are so important because the species we plant can hybridize with the local wild species around us. And so a lot of the plants in my nursery that I'll go into later on are collected from reference sites, are collected from all of our preserves around that can bolster the local populations. The reason why I say this too is humans choose different kinds of traits that maybe the mountains or the climate chooses other traits, choosing meaning selecting for. And so like a bee's bliss with a larger flower and a different kind of phenology is different than a purple sage. So those are all questions we should think about as plant leaders in our area. But the third thing that I'm going to dive into is creating a sense of place and relationships. This is in multiple contexts. We have individuals, we have community, and then we have the greater community, the greater web of everything. I think that plants are vessels for human culture and ecology. My capstone in college was about this. During COVID, I interviewed dozens of people, mostly my friends who were from all different places in the world, about the plants that their families carried. And it really opened my eyes, well, carried through their immigration or carried through their culture. And it really opened my eyes to plants are the literal capsule of our relationship to ecology, and they have all of the answers for us. But when we recognize that, and when I had that realization and I started to like see plants as they were and see all the plants around me and get to know them and identify them, how do we re-enter into that communion if we've lost it? I think a lot of people don't know the native plants around us. I think a lot of people can't identify the plants. So how do we exactly break that down? How do we relinquish the green blur? This is probably very intuitive, but we create relationships with local partners and groups. This is important, especially coming into a new community or learning to do this first and foremost, because when I came into Ojai, the first thing I did was get plugged in, and it gave me a good idea of what was going on in my community. So number two, get to know your community. Who are the people? What do they know? Getting to know my community was working in the nursery and learning what plants people loved. What plants are already entwined with our culture here. Like in the picture here, I don't know if any of you can identify it from your computer screens, but it's hummingbird sage. And that was like #1 plant that people asked for and wanted to know more about and how to grow it. So that was something that I immediately picked up on of like, why do people love this plant? It's the smell, the beautiful flower, its attraction of hummingbirds. And knowing what plants people were drawn to allowed me to get to know my community of what they cared for and what they wanted to know more about. And another classic one is oak trees as well. That is deeply, deeply intertwined with the Ojai community. And I specifically talk about Ojai because that's where I do most of my work, but I think this can be extrapolated into any community we're a part of, Ventura, Thousand Oaks, etc. And then what facets of the community are most in need? These are questions. Who needs access to native plants? Who doesn't get to see them? What plants are not being seen? Are children knowing what the native plants are? These are all questions that like, okay, I know my community now, who needs to relinquish the green blur? And then we foster hands-on in-person connection points, like you see in the picture there. And when I approach talking about plants with people, how I germinate interest, it is very much how I approach my nursery work. It is almost the same practice. How do I germinate people like I germinate my plants? And when I approach a seed, before I talk about people, I look at the ecology of the seed. So like I described in the previous slide, like what is the whole world around it that's made this plant into who it is? And that allows me to like crack that seed and germinate it a little bit. I give it certain kinds of cold stratification or scarify it a little bit. I get to know that lock and key. And I think that's the same with people, is everyone has different motivations that they come from. Um, Intrinsic and extrinsic are different approaches to those motivations that we inspire plants. We inspire people to care for ecology and plants and the habitat around us. Um, Intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. This wording, I think, is something that I've practiced a lot, but just for reference, I got this from the National Rewilding Alliance. Anyway, so intrinsic versus extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is internal, it's personal, and it's derived from passion, and it's long lasting. This is when someone has something deep within them that they care about. And if you connect that to ecology, I think it has a really long lasting effect and it takes root deeply. Extrinsic motivation is external, it's trendy, it's what it's cool, and there's usually a quick turnaround. I think this is really common nowadays, especially with social media. And as a young person watching all the trends roll through, trends aren't in decades anymore, they're usually in months. And so I really take care with how I communicate about native plants to make sure it's something that is deeply rooted into people's personal passions, and not just like, hey, let's do this because it's good and it's cool and we got to solve this now, but like really getting to the root of why people care. And then we want to fill some knowledge gaps. What do people need to know about? What questions are they asking? I think I really look at when people come to me in workshops or the nursery, the questions they're asking about watering and soil, those questions is what frames how I approach the answer. I'm not always going to give them exactly the answer they need to know, but guiding them through the thought process of how to understand the plant. I usually will, if people come to me and like, I want this plant, but it won't grow in my garden. We walk through what their garden is, what their soil is, what they love about the plant. And then we can come together, collaborate alongside one another to find a plant or a solution to their problem together. And that collaboration, I think, is really important so that that thought process can be carried into all of the solutions of learning about habitat or trying a native garden. I think accessibility is another huge problem with native plants. And I think the California Native Plant Society does an amazing job of creating more accessible language and more accessible events. But I always get people in the nursery who are still like, there's a next step that needs to happen. And so I always am trying to find where those gaps are and fill them. And then language barriers, I think, is a really important note. You know, I'm working a lot in agricultural lands with hedgerows, and there's agricultural workers who speak Spanish. And I think that's really important as native plant leaders to acknowledge that a large portion of our environmental workers and our environmental leaders are Spanish speakers. And that is a huge knowledge, like a gap that we need to fill that when I work with people who speak Spanish, it is more than just, hey, weed whack this or weed whack this. But over my years of working with them, it's like, okay, let's find our common words that we know. I don't speak fluent, but I really try hard to learn the restoration language in Spanish to communicate. And so it's a learning process, again, collaborating with one another. This is a diagram that I drew in my notebook that I got from Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. She's a wonderful marine biologist, science communicator. She focuses a lot of her work on policy, but she has a few books where she inspires the readers to think about what brings them joy, one Venn diagram, overlapping with what work needs doing and what are you good at. And like in the middle, that's where your climate action is. This is a really inspiring way to get people excited about climate action, about native plants. It's like it's meeting them where they're at. And it also is a positivity. I lead a book club on some of her books. And this is a great diagram where, like, intergenerationally, there's people in their late 80s, in their early 20s, and we talk about this together. And it's a really inspiring way to imagine a future together. So, not just posing problems, but really getting into the nitty-gritty of how humans interact with nature as well. There's a lot of climate guilt out there, and the positivity and the inspiration is much needed. And I think as leaders, we need to continually think about that, and inspire people to meet the plants where they are. And I'm going to get into how we do that in the nitty-gritty of like actually teaching native plants. But I think in general, this is a great way to approach any climate work that we do. So my like perfect in a bow way to do all of this is nursery work. I think it ties together all of these ideas into one perfect package. Nursery work is a bridge to teach complex ecological dynamics to our community. I don't know if this is blocking us, but this is my favorite way to approach community work. I think nurseries are already intertwined in our culture. People know nurseries, people know plants are where, like nurseries is where we find plants. I think sometimes nature is a hard place for people to approach knowing plants because there's so many and it's always different every time you go out, and it can be a really high barrier of entry. But I think a nursery work is perfect because you see the plants in front of you. You can observe their cycles really easily. You can see their roots. You can see their phenology. You can see their foliage and all of their nodes, and you can observe it in a living specimen. I would even argue it's like a living herbarium for us to communicate with and interact with. I also think it's amazing because it is a direct communication with plants, and it is a direct caring and positivity with plants that gets people really excited. Like when you're transplanting, you get your hands dirty, you're interacting physically with this plant and you're caring for it and communicating with it as you're caring for it. Like those actions of transplanting, giving it soil, giving it nutrients, trimming it, that is the language of plants. And being able to do that allows everyone to participate. We also make so many great observations throughout the nursery cycles. And that allows a really great basis to apply them to like complex ecological dynamics. Us as humans, we are, I think, made to understand ecological dynamics. We are a part of the ecosystem. And if we've been disconnected for a while, this is a great starting point. So our nursery community, who does this for us and with us? We have volunteers, we have private landowners who participate, we have native plant enthusiasts. Pat has been in the nursery many of a times. We have young adults and we have neighbors. Talking about these people really inspires me. It is really consistent love that we get from all of our different participants. It is, even in that picture there's the shade cloth, and that was 100-degree day that we built that with volunteers, and that was a direct caring for these plants. You can see Mark here. He's a great volunteer of ours. He is really shy, so he probably doesn't appreciate the shout out, but he's one of our most consistent and loving volunteers who is transplanting a chlorothrogeny. And I really love the nursery too because it is an accessible place. Our oldest volunteers and our youngest volunteers are in the nursery community. We have young, like even 2-year-olds helping us plant acorns. And because you don't have to do a lot of walking, like a lot of our other volunteering is at Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, it's a really quick, well, it's a really calm way to like interact with nature. And so I love that the nursery is a great starting point for all kinds of people. And we also interact a lot with local professionals, like local architects, landscape architects, landscapers, other environmentalists. So it's a wonderful like amalgamation of a lot of different kinds of people. But how does this apply and fit into like the landscape-wide restoration? When I work at Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, we have our conserved land, right? And we work on it and we steward it and we do our best of our ability. But I think lately we've been trying to get more into landscape-wide restoration, which I think the nursery is a great foundation for this. It is like the connectivity doesn't stop. There's no wild and then there's human and urban, right? There needs to be a blend of this. The rivers run through our towns. The backyards connect to one another. And so we do this connectivity with rewilding gardens with native plants, working on agricultural lands. I really believe that stewardship and restoration practices, they're a shared culture. It is, I, my whole career, I'm going to try and give every single drop of what I learned back into the community. It needs to be a grassroots cultural phenomenon. And again, coming intrinsically from everyone's own motivations and climate actions. So yeah, that is we can get into each of those. Private lands and agriculture, hedgerows and oranges to oaks. So ag land faces a lot of the poignant issues of climate change, and I would say are some of the first people to feel the effects. Because agriculture is very tied into the ecological processes around us. They're the first to sense water crises with droughts or floods. A lot of agriculture is in the WUI interface, the wildland-urban interface. And so they are affected by fire. There's a biodiversity loss affects pollination. And soil loss is huge. It's a huge problem, especially for fields that don't have cover crops or only have row crops. And it can be a big problem and then perpetuate more and more fertilizers and nutrients into the soil. So this all deeply affects agriculture. And I think because of that, engaging these kinds of landowners in rewilding their property is really, really important. We do that through a few different ways. Hedgerows is a great thing. It takes like the corners of unused land on agricultural lands and it's able to turn it into these biodiversity hotspots of native plants. It's great for wind control, flooding, erosion control. Another huge part of Ojai in general is that we have a lot of orchards and the microclimates are changing here. The temperatures are getting extreme. The wind events are happening at different rates. A lot of smaller farmers can't support their like 3-acre, 5-acre, 10-acre farms anymore. And so therefore, as these trees are dying, what are they going to do? Is it going to become a field of weeds? And that's where a lot of our work comes in, where we get to convert those lands back to oak trees, and create different kinds of microclimates that give back to the soil and protect us from fire and all of those wonderful things. And a lot of our work, we don't just plant trees. It takes so long for those canopies to close. Therefore, we are doing a lot of different kinds of plantings. And our nursery grows 75 different species of plants. So you can imagine a lot of biodiversity, a lot of fun plants to work with. And communicating that, like to transition into like how we communicate that, working with the farmers is my greatest joy in life. It is so fun to try and find people where they're at and communicate complex restoration to people who don't know much about restoration. A lot of our work is done in unison with the farmers. We are not just going in and doing it and leaving it. Like this is a full-blown process that we're doing together, we're collaborating on. That means we have to be really creative and communicate to them in the level that they're at. And that can be from highly advanced to knowing nothing about native plants. This picture is an example of how I communicate to farmers. We list our native plants, we give pictures, and we laminate this and give it to the farmers. And this is such a fun way to communicate, because it's not just a restoration plan with a list of plants. That is not very accessible. You can even see if you look at the chart, there's like a landowner name and it's like poofy weed. Like that's culture. That is like a very fun way to create and be creative with like how they remember the plant, incorporating it into the science of doing restoration. You know, we have the recommendations of how to deal with it. We have its Cal IPC status and the links to how to deal with it even more. And then alongside that, that's the landowner name. So I think these are like creative, fun solutions to communicate with one another. And I think it's really fun. And then another part is like gardens. That's a whole different component of relationship, versus like ag land. Ag land is like outside of the house. Um, it is, you know, incorporating within irrigation of agricultural lands, but this is different. Around homes, it's a lot more personal to the gardener themselves. But I love that gardens are a stepping stone into learning ecology, because people get really hands-on learning. It creates habitat connectivity. But my two other favorite parts of rewilding and talking to rewilders is first is making them fall in love with senescence. That is a term I use about California native gardens in trying to communicate the importance of our local plant phenologies. We are not English gardens. Things don't always go dormant in wintertime and go green all throughout summer. Like that is, I think, a lot of what has been taught in my horticultural classes of what gardens should look like. And a lot of landscapers only view gardens in that lens. But instead, we're trying to re-lens how people see their plants, and that's okay if things go dormant in the summer and fall. And this point, like I love teaching people about seeds and like the full plant life cycle so that that can be understood and loved by them. And then I think transitioning into the next slide, collective stewardship is a huge portion of how we communicate rewild gardens. It's not just one person doing this alone. It is a whole community of people. And so we have workshops where we go through every single nitty-gritty component of what it means to be in relationship with a plant. We talk through pruning, we talk through watering, we do sowing, we do planting, we talk about weed management and seed collection even. This is so important. It is because like the physicality of what this work is, of what it means to be in relationship with the habitat around us, that is the relationship, that is the communication. And so when I'm communicating to anyone, to the public, about how to learn more about plants, it starts with these basic concepts, and it's what's the most fun. Being able to like know where a node is. Like that was the first thing I learned about a plant, is where to cut a basil plant and like looking for the node. And that is forever intertwined in my brain when I'm even teaching these workshops to this day. And so that is a passing on of knowledge that is then shared with a whole group of people that is there learning together. And it's great because it's interactive. We do it together, and learn together. I think it's really important too, like, here's my little ode to communicating, working with plants, is teach not just the plant names, but the cycles and the personality of the plant. Teach not just the cycles of the plant, but how we affect it. Teach not just how we affect our plants, but how to positively grow with the garden. And this, again, is all about the positivity and all about the interaction we have. It is removing the barrier between nature and us and re-establishing how we see ourselves in that. And I think gardens is a great way to rethink our relationship. And so I want to linger on a story about a Rewild's workshop we did. This is a picture of a workshop Martin and I did teaching people how to plant and water plants. We are in a garden of native plants that we had planted that was a year old. And you can see all of us are out in the garden, in nature, working on it together. It is a whole group of people. There are people who have rewild gardens there, so they're gardeners. There are often landscapers who come to our workshops. There are like a diverse array of people. There's even people like 1 year gardens, people who haven't done their garden yet. And then there's people who've been doing it for 10 years. So it's this like really fun layering of ideas and different knowledge bases. And so we're all able to work through and talk together. But the story I want to tell is when we were doing another workshop on seeds, we were at the nursery, and this workshop, I usually teach how to collect seed. We walk through all the science of how I do it. I'm a botanist, so I make sure to not over collect. I follow all the recommended guidelines of only a 5%, and how to evaluate the health of the population, how to record the data, all of the plant alliances, all of the associative species. We look at the seeds themselves and all the resources I have on what the seed should look like, how to test if it's viable or not, how much to collect from each flower versus each plant versus each population. Those are all we go through plant phenology, and we even like go through how to process the seed, how to take it from its berry to its seed, and how to store it. All of the things we need to know. And I was walking through with my group of different people. There's like a landscape architect. There was a private lands restoration person present who had a restoration plan that we were collaborating on. We had a bunch of rewild gardeners, and I walked them through, and then I was like, but you can't collect on OVLC lands, and you can't collect on most lands without permission. Caveat there, like the Chumash can collect on our lands and I can collect on our lands, but typically we just do it that's it. Like the public can't collect. So what do we do? And they looked at me and they were like, what? Wait, why did you teach us all this if we can't do this? And then naturally the group had this idea of like, maybe we should share our own seeds from our garden. And that like is the true representation of where we're trying to get in this science communication in these workshops. is creating those ideas that comes from them and is able to support a full connectivity. Like all these people live in Ojai and they have gardens that go from one side of the valley to the other and sharing seeds that they, that came from the nursery that originally came from the watershed and are able to be spread and shared with one another. That is the point of all this. And that is my ending point. I would love to take questions. If anyone has any questions, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
That was great. Thank you so much, Sophie.
Yeah.
I really like that. I love your idea of falling in love with senescence. I am always, apologizing for how my yard looks this time of year, but I'm going to stop doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, they should like show them the seed and the bugs that are all eating it and the birds. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do get this time of year, I get a lot of birds because they are after the seeds.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention, if you guys come to our tabling events, is I always have a huge bag of Terry's native seed grab bag that I give away seeds that I love to sit around and uh, sort my seeds.
You're
And then
doing it.
I had my camera off because I'm actually doing some seed envelopes right now.
I love that. I love that.
And I hope people, are successful growing them. I usually do some myself, but I've got too many plants. But anyway, it's super fun to grow them, and I know Dean does this too. We often share our garden seeds because we both have fun gardens.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
Viv-
Vivian, your hand up. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask us your question.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Vivon. I had a quick question for Sophie here. Thank you so much. Your presentation was phenomenal. Very interesting. My question for you is I really appreciated the intrinsic versus extrinsic conversation early on in your presentation. And I'm just wondering, like, okay, I feel like how do you foster? I was going to say build, but I feel like foster is a better word here. How do you foster intrinsic motivation and like intrinsic desire for doing this work? Because like I am someone who you have taught me a lot about loving native plants and loving what they do. And you have helped foster that within me, I feel like. But at any scale, at a like individual scale, at a broader scale for people who are practitioners who are trying to convince their public, how do you help people foster intrinsic motivation to rewild their own yards?
That's a great question. Yeah, you were one of my test subjects, I guess I would say, on how to foster. Vavon and I work together, and she is desperately passionate about restoration, but plants was something that I've helped you learn. I think like first answer is definitely honesty. And I think we've done that a lot together in our projects in teaching the public is never be dishonest and never hide information. Like even if it seems like people will be fearful of the information, like why are you cutting down a eucalyptus tree? Like you never hide it and you always come honestly. And that builds trust first and foremost. I think like you approach it like you would approach any relationship in the large scale or small scale, or talking about like individually, like I have a lot of high school interns, or I have two at a time, but I've gone through graduating students, and a lot of them have started off with no knowledge base, no understanding, and have come out of it like wanting to study ecology. And that process is very personal. And there is no framework for this kind of thing. It like is a path of empathy and it is a path of getting to know. Like why I think I kept trying to reiterate is like you got to know the person and the community in front of you in order to find the solution. And so it's specific and it's nuanced, and it's how I approach my restoration work as well. Is like you don't just apply a blanket restoration plan to every parcel of land you want to restore. You look at what's there. You look at a reference site. And so, approach your relationships with people and changing their minds about plants in the same way is like, what do they care about? And you come from that portion or that like perspective. Thanks, Bhavan.
Thank you, Sophie.
Is that fish? Is that how you pronounce your
I,
name?
it's just an abbreviation from my email. It's FLS White, which is my initials and last name.
Mhm.
So the question I have, and I'm not sure how much of it's a problem in Ojai, but
Mhm.
it's living in communities with HOAs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's is how do we
Yeah.
get over that challenge? Because it's us, because there's always these rules that you deal with that
Um,
sometimes make it very almost impossible to uh, to create a native garden. So it's just one of those things that it's
that's
an
a huge
education
challenge.
process. But yeah, I just remind us that maybe sometimes we have another hurdle that we have to think about.
That's a great point. Like the policy and or even the systems that we live within are made for not what we want to build towards. And that's a hard barrier to cross. I love to infiltrate from the inside out, and I would inspire community members to join their HOAs. I think that is probably a number one thing is change the rules from the inside, change this the belly of the beast in a way. Um, I don't have a direct solution for that. I think Ojai doesn't have at least the communities I've interacted with, and maybe this is a bias of like a positive bias of like people who come to me looking to rewild aren't from HOAs, but I don't think that's a huge problem in our community, but I think I completely agree that's a barrier. Yeah, Terry.
I like your answer to change from within. I just had somebody contact CMPSCI, and she is a member, but she is working with their person who's on their landscape committee within the HOA. And, so we're trying to come up with some things. But another thing that I think is related is, rules around landscaping and fire, which
Yeah.
you know a lot about. And that is evolving, but not fast enough.
Mhm.
um, so I wonder if you have some words on that.
That's a great point. Right now, we're really trying to get our heads around what actually are the rules and policy because it's not always straightforward. And I think it's really hard because there's so many nexuses of confusion that I think the community is equally like I'm right there with everyone in how it's really challenging to understand. Like the insurance companies will tell you one thing that's different from what the fire safe councils are telling you to do. And that is so challenging. I think typically like we're trying to figure out what that looks like, but I talking about a future that I see and want, and this is like notwithstanding the policies that are there, is I don't think native plants equals like fire danger. And I think there's lots of ways we can manage the plants around our home that can reduce fuels or pick species that actually reduce fire behavior in general. I think oak trees are a great example. I think the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is trying to do research on how it creates microclimates and catches embers. There's not a ton of research out on it yet, but a lot of the fire safe councils, every single community protection plan I've read in Ojai and Montecito and Santa Barbara, like they all say plant oak trees, right? And so I think native plants, like in conclusion, can be good. And like even grasses, the low growing grasses and the low growing the hummingbird sage, those are all things that we can really build towards and as a community work towards, okay, this is when we want to prune our salvias to reduce fuels around the home. Like those are things we can do. It's not a this plant is good and this plant is bad with fire. But it's more of like how we understand and steward the plants around us. That's what I want to get towards. That's what I'm trying to teach in my workshops of like what I don't know how in like I think the policy is yet to even delineate what's okay and what's not okay. Yeah.
And I just wanted to add, as someone who spends a lot of time with Sophie, is that, and who sat in on this wonderful presentation, is that invite Sophie to your next HOA meeting. And honestly, I think it is, to be completely honest, in an HOA setting, it's not about the fire safe regulations. It's more about, honestly, not to like throw any shade on any of that. It's a bit about the aesthetics and the just a very surface level acknowledgement of what like our community should look like. And I do think that it is as Sophie was talking about with intrinsic motivation, it's multifaceted. If people care about what their neighborhood looks like, I totally get that. Show people what your neighborhood can look like, right? Demonstrate what your neighborhood, because an HOA is a small community. Honestly, in my opinion, it's a highly, you can influence it in a very meaningful way, right? Like your voice is probably, you might not think it's that important, but it's probably pretty important in what your community is doing, right? And so bringing someone with knowledge and beautiful photos and wonderful imagery and acknowledgement of what you can do there, I think is helpful. So that's my personal opinion, is like bring someone like Sophie or Sophie in who can help change the narrative a little bit, because I think it's a bit surface level what your HOA might be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a personal opinion, not like, I know my tagline says OVLC, but that's my personal opinion on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A lot of the barriers are aesthetic and learning to like love and break down those barriers of like what it can look like. Yeah, and then in terms of the fire, I think there's a lot of potential to live to have safe native fire safe like gardens and wildland urban interfaces. And that's also leads into my work with prescribed fire of like how do we have well-managed WUIs that benefit native plants too. It's not just mowing and grazing entirely around our communities, but we're working in restoration tools that can change fire behavior in a positive way for both plants and humans. Yeah, and that's my opinion. I think there's a lot to talk about. I've gone to a lot of wildfire conferences and just fire conferences and chaparral and fire interactions. And there's so much, I think, even within the like community that knows a lot, there's so much unknown. And so I'm excited to be a part of like trying to figure that out in the nuance of Ojai and the nuance of every place should be different and it should be applied in it like from the perspective of that spot.
But that also affects watersheds. I mean, the
Yeah.
actually having that kind of the representation of natural fire actually is positive to the watersheds and the flooding issues that we deal with. It's well, it's because none of it is separate. It's all integrated.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, good fire. Like not all fire is bad. Fire can be scary in like the Thomas fire, for example. Like that is in the community. That talking about culture and what's going on around us. That is something that is so people are so desperately thinking about all the time. And so like introducing fire in a good way is so important. Yeah. And it's like we had 200 volunteer hours on our burn, preparing the burn, helping mop up. And that again is like incorporating people into the process, into the culture of what it is. Like that is what we need to do. It's not like certain people steward the land and the rest just live. It's like we're all a part of this, and yeah, including fire, even.
Hey, I'm Dean, and I'm with the part of the Native Plant Society. I'm thrilled that you're here. Thanks for joining us, and I'm like so much to chat about. I think my son actually participated in your prescribed burn, funny enough, as an intern. So, the small world of things. And on the same topic, that there's going to be the Ventura Congress of Councils. This is a number of community councils, like 7 of them that the city recognizes, and they're going to join on Monday. Just so happens to chat about Zone Zero and the effect that's having on the community and how we're supposed to push back. I mean, I'm supposed to push back, and I do have people coming forward to me to ask, what are the right responses to not just collapse in the face of these new policies that aren't really in effect yet. So really looking to people like yourself from the science community who have real knowledge base to give us enough information to push back as a community against some of what we feel is maybe insurance-based, policies. That said, I am curious to find out now, how much do you use, for instance, some burning chaff or something to maybe help germinate your seeds around your nursery?
That's a really good question. I use liquid smoke sometimes. So seeds are either like internally dormant or they're externally dormant. Like you can break them open with chemicals or physicality. So things that follow fire is sometimes they have a really thick seed coat. And so ceanothus, I will literally boil the seed. So I don't burn it necessarily, but I boil the seed and then it germinates like nobody's business. Um, and but liquid smoke is something you can use with seed where those chemicals are important for those seed germination. I don't use a ton in the nursery. I do like a lot of physical like scarification, like clipping Malacathamnus seed, like mallows. I clip it with a knife, or I do the um sandpaper on the deerweed because that also is a fire follower. So it's just these really thick seed coats that are waiting for fire. Um, and that's my answer. I think I have germinated a lot of seed when I did the prescribed burn. We seeded with native fire followers. So that was a way, it was a really grand seed tray. It was 25 acres of a seed tray, lots of red maids. But yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. And I love your note on like how can we push back on like policy that maybe doesn't truly um, the like the communities we live within. I really like that.
Yeah, well, we certainly need to hear from you, knowing what fuels, or isn't, a harsh fuel in the face of fire. I mean, honestly, the big picture being that when the wind blows like it did, when you have a 95-mile-an-hour wind, virtually everything bursts. So just, there's not much I can say about that. But, knowing which plants, are, are friendly in the face of these things, it helps.
Yeah,
I've
or also can be managed where they don't have fuel in those events. Like there are things that go dormant or like you can cut back. Like that's also something, it's about our stewardship of it. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, I think that's important. So I'm in the midst myself. Well, I think before everybody arrived, I sort of mentioned that I was in the midst of sort of cutting back the wildness of my yard right now, and amongst them is the salvia, which is quite done for the season. I'm trying to leave the seed and take it back a little bit, but just those moments where you can see it's pretty brittle. Um, do you have a couple examples of the Spanish Restoration words that you like that you seem to use a lot?
Good question. Um, it's a lot of Spanglish, to be honest. Like, I usually there's this one site that I work on. I think I see Brad's here. If that's the Brad I know, he helped me control some of the eucalyptus on that site. It's in east end of Ojai. It is a site where there's a lot of thistle, and we have yellow star thistle, Italian thistle, and milk thistle. And so I didn't know the word for thistle, but like I would say estrella thistle or leche thistle, or Italiano, I think is the word thistle. And then I would describe why in Spanish, like why we call it that, like las semillas, so, like I would go through it, but semillas is a big word I use. Pasto, which is grass, semillas is seed. Weedo is weed whack. Yeah, you put me on the spot there, but I love communicating in Spanish. And it really challenges me.
I have
Yeah.
two more for you. What is the hardest or rarest plant that you're propagating at the nursery?
Oh, good question. That I'm propagating rarest. Oh, I know. And this one's not a rare plant, but it is really rare in Ojai. It is Yerba Buena. And Yerba Buena is well loved by everyone, but it is not present in Ojai. There's like records from the 60s. And everyone asks for it. It's such a beautiful herb. It's so medicinal. It's so aromatic. It grows under oaks in like kind of ephemeral creeks. And I found a beautiful patch of it, and it was huge. And I took like two little sprigs and I started propagating it in the nursery. And that to me was I love that plant because it is not really prolific in Ojai. And when people ask for things, I want to give local genetics and I want to give them the plant that is able to survive in Ojai, not the ones that are from like Big Sur or like Northern California that are used to that climate, but like let's work with the one that survived the droughts. And so that is my answer to that question, is like the special one in my nursery right now.
You're so funny. The timing on that is just couldn't be more unique. I've got Clinopodium, Douglas, growing miserably down here in Ventura underneath my trees here, and it's like it comes back every spring. Looks like it's going to flourish, and right now I walked out there and it's like it's died back again for no reason. I
Yeah.
can't tell you. And I mean, you think it'd be thriving.
Yeah.
Last question. Explain me climate guilt.
Climate guilt. Ooh, I love your questions. Climate guilt is something that I feel because I am a human and I use plastic and I drive a car and I do all of the things that they say as a human, I have a footprint in this world and it's causing these climate issues. And living in a system where sometimes I can't change that, I can't change all of my habits is really hard. So that is, yeah, the climate guilt is feeling guilty for that. Um, and I think that is a really important feeling. I was in our book club. The question I posed to our group was, Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, she talked about these dichotomies that live within her. And it felt like they were opposing. Like she was saying how she grew up in an urban environment, but she loves the forest. She's Black and white. Um, her ancestors are from Jamaica, but she grew up in New York. These are all these things that oppose one another in her feelings and ideas. And um, they were actually what fueled her. All of those different things that seemed like they opposed, they actually fueled her to have the she calls them currents within her to do the right thing and to do her climate action. And to me, one of those currents or dichotomies is the climate guilt, to feeling guilty. And then it's made me turn around and be like, okay, instead of worrying about my carbon footprint, it's going to be planting a bunch of native plants. Like you take one feeling and you turn it on its head. Yeah.
Any other questions? Terry, you back with me? Pat?
I have a question. This was so fascinating, and you're obviously very brilliant at what you do. It's really quite wonderful. Do you offer your workshops pretty much to OVLC or elsewhere? How does that work?
Great question. Yeah, through Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, if you keep up with our events, they are about every couple months and they usually come with the seasons. So whatever is you need to do that season, that's what we're going to talk about. So collecting seed, we did in earlier summer. Pruning, we just did our pruning. So keep up to date with that. If you're really interested in like the rewild side of things, there's a Rewild newsletter. So if you go to our website and click the Rewild button, then you can keep up to date specifically with those Rewild events. That's a great question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Any other questions from our guests this evening? I don't know if I still have Terry. Terry, would you like to step back in, or Pat, would you like to do final honors if we're at the
Pat, you can do the honors.
Well, certainly say thank you very much to Sophie. It was really an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And I'm really looking forward to the one in January. That'll be really interesting. I mean, this one was really interesting. Where can we go from there? So thank you. And yeah, with that, if there's no comments, I guess we call it a night.